Dear audience, welcome to Simania Salon Readings, a platform that I coordinate as part of the activities organized by the Association of Latin American Jewish Studies, known as LAJSA, and to which I invite you to join. My name is Cynthia Gabbay, and I am a researcher and writer. I am currently working at Humboldt University in Berlin, and my research is funded by the German Research Foundation. Today, we gather for the presentation of the first issue of Volume 2 of LAJSA's journal, Latin American Jewish Studies, edited by Della Lockhart, Amalia Ran, and the new editor, Stephen Silverstein. This volume has as guest editors Judit Bokser-Liwerant and Sergio DellaPergola, and its title is Jews and Migration in Latin American Mobility, Uprootedness, and Embeddedness. Simania, which in Hebrew means bookmarker, was conceived to provide a space to discuss books published in the field of Judeo-Latin American studies or of interest to our discipline, whether recent or long-standing. Before I proceed presenting the editors, let me do the announcement of our next presentation that will take place next month on May 14. And we will present the book by Adrian Krupnik, who is also present today. And the book is Between Two Homelands, Argentine Migration to and from Israel. I will now introduce today's participants, mostly Judit Bokser-Liwerant, who is a distinguished professor of political science at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. She's member of the Mexican Academy of Science, distinguished visiting professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, co-editor of the book series Jewish Identities in a Changing World, and co-director chief editor of the Mexican Journal of Political and Social Sciences. Judith was part of the team of the international project Jews in the Americas. She has published numerous books, articles, and chapters. Her works span the intersection of political science, sociology, and contemporary Jewry. She's the president of the Association for Social Scientific Study of Jewry. Also, as a guest editor, LAJS had Sergio DellaPergola, who is a professor emeritus and former chair at the Abraham Harman Institute of Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's a specialist in the demography of Israel and world Jewry and has published numerous books, monographs, and journal articles on population evaluation and projections, international migration, the family, and Jewish identity. Sergio DellaPergola was part of the team of the international project Jews in the Americas. He was the recipient of the Marshall Clare Award in 1999 and Michael Launor Prize for Excellence in Demography and Migration Studies in 2013. Today, we are also happy to hear the voice of some of the contributors of LAJS's new volume, entitled Jews and Migration in Latin American Mobility, as I said, Uprootedness and Embeddedness. And so we have with us Ranan Rein and Igal Eisenberg from Tel Aviv University, Adrian Krupnik from Brandeis University, Perla Eisenkang, Universidad Hebraica de México, Noam Levin from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Karen Lisette Delgado from University of California, Irvine, Gabriela Jonas Aharoni from Sapir College in Israel, Mirta Kupferming from the Memory Studies Association, and Ricardo Perez Navarro from the University of Costa Rica. We will start our presentation with a few words of the Latin American Jewish Studies Journal, Della Lockhart and Stephen Silverstein.
Yes, thank you, Cynthia. I guess, is English the language of the presentation today, or Spanish, or does it matter? Right?
As you wish.
Okay. Good morning, buen dia. At least it's morning for me. It's 7:30 in the morning here in Reno, Nevada. But it's a pleasure to see everybody and a pleasure to participate and say just a little bit as a way of introduction to the presentation that we have today. Latin American Jewish Studies, as you all know, is the official journal of the Latin American Jewish Studies Association. It began a couple of years ago. This now is our second year. It's the third issue. When this was first proposed by Amalia Ran and Judit Bokser and Sergio DellaPergola, we were very pleased. It seemed like a wonderful project, a very broad, very interdisciplinary kind of idea for the journal. There was a really good response to the call for papers. We were very pleased to see all of the different kinds of approaches to this topic for the journal. And it took a little while for this one to get out. It was a little bit complicated, but I think we've got things more smoothly now. I'm just so pleased with the work that Amalia and Judit and Sergio did to bring this particular issue together. It's really a wonderful collection of essays. So thank you to the three special editors of this issue. Stephen and I are the general co-editors of the journal. But on these special issues, it's really the guest editors that bring it all together and coordinate all the work of the contributors. So we're very grateful to everybody who participated in this particular issue to bring it out. So we would just encourage everybody to continue to support the journal, continue to send articles in for special issues or for just regular issues. We're going to have both going forward. We already have the next two issues mapped out and on into production. So we're very pleased with the way that the journal is going. So without saying anything else, I will just turn it over maybe back to you, Cynthia, and then we can see who speaks first. So thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to see everybody.
Thank you very much, Darrell. Yes, so I will give you, Judith, the word if you want.
Yes, of course, but probably Stephen also wants to say some words.
I know we're very short on time, so I think Darrell's introduction was perfect. Thank you all so much for your work on this issue. And Cynthia, thank you so much for agreeing and all the work and effort that you put into organizing this quickly. So thank you all.
Go on, Judith.
Okay, thank you also. Good morning to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. We, as guest editors, are also discovering some faces that were behind the hands that wrote the articles. So I would suggest that in every collective effort of a selected works, anthologies, etc., this idea of holding a Zoom, a collective Zoom meeting is great. Thank you, Cynthia, because your answer was effective and quick, that countervailed the long time that took us to have the volume circulating. So thank you very much. I'm really pleased to see everyone here, and we are in difficult times, very difficult. So we started making an effort to maintain our committed discipline to our work, to our research, somehow helps us to deal with what is the current surrounding conditions. Well, also we have to show our discipline, right? And I will try to be as concise and short as I can. I am known by someone who conceptually, methodologically, I always bet for crossing borders. The problem is that I also cross time allocation borders, so I'll try not to be on this mode. The journal, as was presented by now, right, by Cynthia and by Darrell, reflects really a multidisciplinary effort to approach a wide, a broad topic that that brought us really to try to find what was the logic behind every one of the contributions. And therefore, that's the idea why we decided to have all of us together, and apologies for this short time. It has several aspects or characteristics that I would like to underscore. The first one is the way we approach the immigration, human mobility, individual and collective, that defines the past and present history of the Jewish people. So we approach as a starting point the fact that the Jewish presence in the Americas, particularly in Latin America, including the Caribbean, the Central America, and South American countries, has been deeply marked by international migration. So the founding presence of Jews in Latin America and the current now situation and condition of migration, even defining the contrary original direction that was from the outside to Latin America, and now we follow also from Latin America to outside the continent. Dealing with immigration meant for us also to attend the processes of integrating Jews within what was defined by the broader fabric of the receiving societies, countries, governments, communities, and this brings together two important dimensions that this issue reflects: the individual and the collective. Both are focus of our and the contributors' articles. I would say that the journal starts with an introduction written by Sergio DellaPergola by me that also reflects this effort to cross disciplinary borders and refer to these processes as the urgent request to approach them from different perspectives. Therefore, we consider that Latin America was not only the place and the space where Jews arrived, but also Latin America is an idea, a cultural imaginary, and a project. And simultaneously, we define as Latin America as one and many realities. So we are aware that certain effort of imagination was needed to bring such diverse historical, anthropological, geographical, economic, and political realities under one common denominator. And this was an effort, you know, when we had the material all together, we also, without exercising a violence, I would say, but respecting each and every one of the perspectives, we try to find how the a priori assumption was responding and answering to a post factum writing of an introduction. And I think we try to be coherent. Latin America is a diverse continent, and the Jewish experience in Latin American countries was and is equally diverse. And of course, it reflects the influences of the current countries where Jews are part of them, the societies, cultures, and also the variety of countries of origin, of cultures of origin. And this presence of diversity inside diversity and with diversity opens really a wonderful panorama to discover how our concepts should be respectful of diversity despite our effort to find some common explanation. There is still another feature that characterizes Latin American, Jewish Latin American life and presence, which is the transnational interaction and proximity that has characterized Jewish life with diverse centers from where Jews came, right? We had to face, we had to face, we had to think, to conceptualize the concept of an ethno-national diaspora becoming a transnational diaspora, and how these two dimensions define this presence, right? And we discovered that we have a line, I would say a strong axis where political concepts, values, aspirations, organizational entities from various parts of the world came together. And therefore we had really a panorama, I would again stress, of diversity. Migration then was a founding moment, and it is a current moment that we have to approach. So in this introduction, we refer to several points or several dimensions, analytical dimensions. One was immigration, population, and social structure. And we had there to reflect how Latin American Jewry shaped its communal life along strong, interconnected solidarity and dependence or peripheral lines in the Jewish world. We also are aware, and probably the best testimony is the authors that contribute to this volume, that today we see the second, third, and fourth generation of Latin Americans. And in this sense, the Jewish Latin American diaspora developed a more original character that combines origin of ancestry, but today reality of the social, political, and economic realities where they live, right? We stress these dialectics of moving and staying that became increasingly evident after Second World War, and until today traces I would say, a geocultural, geopolitical line of crossing borders, as we said. We also approach in the introduction trying to be loyal to what the issue and the author contribute about Jewish identification, that personal, institutional, and collective, and also follow how the institutional dimension has changed over time and allow us to see that there is a shared, I would say, a shared trait of communities in Latin America and in the world Jewish system, we would say, that is transiting from a basic approach that could be defined by processes of secularization and also processes of diaspora making, to the reverse, the resurgence of strong religious identities that play very heavily inside the countries and in the Jewish world. We attended really also the contradictory character of the globalization processes, right? And the responses it elicited, sometimes referring to them as a source of inspiration, and sometimes precisely challenging, right, the impacts of globalization. Sorry, I apologize. I'm having problems with my voice and cough. We also attended in a very, I would say, important reference, the place of gender and family and how they express this presence today, gender, women, family, identity, in the cultural world and in the literary imagination. Identity building as went through these forms of creativity that characterize and define today widely the Latin American scene or scenarios, no? If we want to see how different axes or dimensions shape and reflect the changes, the literature sphere, the cultural sphere, and the presence of women is one of the interesting approaches that also this journal brings together. I would say that we dare to do, and I probably will ask Sergio if we can focus. He wants to focus there. What are the research challenges today that we face in all the different disciplinary, theoretical, methodological perspective? This would give us really the possibility to look ahead of the collaboration of this group. We have different views, different theories, different approaches, and all of them are somehow reflected in the dyad, subjectivity and objectivity, the individual and the collective, the singular and the frequent, the repeatable and the non-repeatable, the extraordinary and the routine. So history, other social sciences, literary, cultural studies have converged with different impact in our field. And today we are, I think, also looking ahead for a more interactive disciplinary effort. Cynthia, am I on time or do I enjoy for some minutes more?
You have, you can take 2 minutes more and then we will switch to Sergio.
Okay, that's okay. So this volume is defined by defined or composed by 11 essays covering, as I said, a wide spectrum or range of topics. From the colonization of the Americas to the present. We have voices of authors from 13 different universities and institutions: Costa Rica, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, the United States, and Israel. And we decided to divide the issue in 4 sections. The first one is migration, integration, and community. The second one, the Israeli factor in Latin American Jewish migration. The third one, cultural expression, literature, and the arts. And we finish with a personal testimony in the field of art, right? I see that the first volume represents a wide and diverse sample of experiences in Jewish immigration, and the case study reflect the difference and also the common challenges individual and community and the collective had to face. Then we turn to a second part that has to do with migration, circulation, and integration of Jewish migrants to and from Israel. This is also a topic of 4 of the papers that were brought. The third part of the issue, comprising 3 papers, is devoted to a varied array of cultural, literary, and performing studies, art studies. And as I said, we finish with a personal testimony expressed through art. Let me finish with an observation that was first raised by Sergio, and I totally agree with him, that while each essay covers one particular aspect of a journey, individual, collective, physical, cultural, social, and even mystical, what is surprising of all the contribution, what is surprising is that uprootedness doesn't appear to be the dominant over embeddedness. Somehow we attend to a process where identity and being and belonging was combining both moments, but also looking to the way that the human alienation and distress that immigrants suffer, and expressed individually in some of the papers, the articles, and also collectively expressed in other, as you will see. At the same time, these personal sufferings or sacrifice, we face the will and effort behind the personal and collective effort to build more friendly microenvironments, to construct or reconstruct stable patterns of cultural adaptation, adjustment, integration under new circumstances, and build all the bridges that bring us today to this, and having here Ranan and having here Sergio, of course, the princess, I would say to deal us conceptually with the, I would say, with the definition or Jewish in the Americas, Jewish of the Americas, Latin American Jews, Jewish Latin American. We see here really a very sustained effort of colleagues that discover that finally social sciences, humanities are part of our vital reality today, and this is valid for us in diaspora communities and in Israel. I would finish daring to say that today we attend a cultural, I would say, and even civilizational, depending on which level we focus our attention, between cultures, between ideologies, between narratives, and between ways of understanding the moment we live. So thank you to all of you. Thank to the editors. Thank you to the authors. And thank you, Sergio, because finally it was a triangle invitation. You got the invitation, you invited me, so I am on board. So I liked all this effort. Thank you very much to all of you. Now, Sergio, it's your turn.
Thank you, Judith, and many thanks are due to the LAJSA, first of all, for having the journal, which is a brave initiative, and hopefully will be successful. Cynthia, thank you for having this meeting. And I have to start with words of thanks for the main editors of the journal and the reviewers. We had a panel of reviewers. This is a peer-reviewed journal, and so each paper was reviewed by at least two scholars, and many thanks to them, and of course the contributors. I probably should start with an apology because the Latin American Jewish studies title has three components. One is Latin America, one is Jewish, and one is scholarship. And I suppose I personally own two of them, not the three of them. I am a student, I am a Jew, I'm not a Latin American. I'm kind of intruder, which has advantages and disadvantages, because on the one hand, the fact of being a participant observer that is looking at things from inside has huge advantages, because you often understand the dynamics and the nuances much better than the outsider, and this is an integral part of the things we do. It may be that looking at things from the outside has also some advantages because you bring perhaps a comparative state of mind and framework and tools. And sometimes it is also true that the first-time visitor notes things that the old settlers, the habitués, don't see anymore, because it's so much part of their habitus. And so it's normal to someone from the outside. It may be not. And in any case, it is very interesting to compare this thing with another thing. But substantially, Latin American Jewish studies, of course, has a challenge because, of course, you have to justify it. You have to ask the question whether is there a separate domain of studies, which is Latin America, unlike North American or Western European or Eastern European. And so what's the justification for this? And we have to find good answers to that. In particular, the location of Latin America can be multiple, because Latin America can be seen on its own, although, of course, Latin America is so many different things. The Caribbean and the northern part of the southern continent and the Cono Sur, these are, in fact, very different social, human, anthropological, historical environments. You have the Spanish area of colonization and the Portuguese, and small areas of British and French and maybe other colonizations, and each with their patterns, fundamental though, although long-lasting, because each European country in the dramatic meeting with the ancient, more ancient local civilizations brought in different patterns of religion. Different religions were brought into Latin America in the broad sense, different legal patterns and different economic patterns. It was not a uniform European colonization. It was a very heterogeneous one. And also, of course, the local civilizations were very different and at very different stages of development, and with very different beliefs and economic modes. And so it's a matrix, a twofold matrix, which has numerous combinations of the old and the new. So in one sense, it is an oversimplification to speak of Latin America. On the other hand, it makes sense when you compare it with other broad areas of the world. But here the challenge becomes, is Latin America part of the Americas? And as was mentioned before, we launched years ago a very interesting and I think successful project, speaking of the Jews in the Americas, which brought a publication, a special volume of contemporary Jewry a couple of years ago, where we analyzed the Americas as a complex. And but not only the juxtaposition of the different geographical components, but the analysis of the interactions, the mobilities, and the mutual influences of each part upon the other. Of course, it is not one-way influences, it is two-way influences or multiple influences, and this is of great interest, although there are also ways of looking at the complex of the Americas as one complex within which then you can find the specific position of each of the particular local components. This theme of the local versus the transnational is in fact one of the central themes of concern and interest in my view, because of course both are justified. You have to look at local situations considering the local frame of reference, which has very powerful constraints upon the Jewish population. We speak, of course, always of a non-Jewish majority and of a Jewish minority. And so the relationship of dominance and dependency are very clear, although the minority can be very influential as well. And so we have this sort of local framework. However, we also have to look at the many commonalities that the different Jewish local realities have, because after all of the Jews are immigrants from somewhere else. Therefore, assuming Torres, who helped Columbus in his first travel, was a Jew, in any case, he was also coming from the outside. There were Jews since the beginning, but in any case, they were not part of the original landscape. And more seriously and more broadly, you have to consider that Jewish immigration has been a crucial factor, and therefore immigration has brought into Latin American countries and societies patterns of culture and socioeconomic stratification and beliefs, and importantly, the Jewish community organizational frameworks that pre-existed abroad. Was it Eastern Europe or Central Europe, the Middle East or North Africa? Because, of course, Jewish immigration had certain dominant components, but it was rich of very different experiences, as we also see, by the way, in our volume. And so the local and the transnational and the original versus the transplanted are very crucial components in this. Let me, though, at this point, make a break and say this. Unfortunately, on one hand, the fact we are here around this screen talking of Latin American Jewish studies is a symptom of mental sanity at a moment where the world is really insane and dangerous. And I cannot refrain from mentioning October 7, 2023 as a historical watershed in terms of history, in terms of the interpretation of history, in terms of the Jewish condition, and in terms, of course, of trying to read and understand the Middle East. But returning to ask a question which I was just asking myself was whether having the papers, of course, all completed long before October 7, if the authors were to rewrite their papers today, would their papers be similar or different? Would that be an October 7 influence in their mode of reading the situation, be it, of course, historical, sociological, literary, or artistic, or otherwise? This is a question that I don't think we can elude, because, again, as participant observers, we, in a sense, are part of what we are describing and analyzing, and of course we are influenced by what happens around us. And I think I know personally my personal attitude towards certain historical analysis, even toward the concept and practice of anti-Semitism, is not today exactly the same as it was 6 months ago. And fundamentally, the academic part that is asking ourselves, we are all more or less academics. We live in an academic environment. We know the rules, but have the rules changed over the last months or not? And therefore, is our scientific work affected or not by what happens here around? But going back to the issue of Latin American Jewish studies, I was very happy to find that there is a great diversity of approaches. The disciplines covered are many, and of course, this is one first answer to the challenge: is there a preferred methodological approach to studying Jewish society? And of course not, because all of the approaches are valid and they are sometimes similar, sometimes different in results. But what is the evident conclusion is that they must go hand in hand. And so this is, of course, an invitation to do multi and transdisciplinary work together, and to investigate certain topics from multiple perspectives. I think this is an enrichment. So rather than the juxtaposition of themes and papers, it would be nice in the next step to have people working together and analyzing the same question in a combined effort. So this is one thing. Of course, when looking at the public at stake, which is the major object of observation, the processes that Judith just mentioned, that is the contrast between secularization and desecularization, which is very, very, very evident and very interesting. In fact, in my view, one of the most interesting aspects, because I find it also in Europe, and I find it to some extent also in the United States of America. So this is, in a sense, a change of direction of the pendulum, which went in a certain direction, but for reasons which are complex, have now perhaps changed its direction. This is a very attractive theme to explore. And then also the question of de-diasporization versus diasporization, de-diasporization versus diasporization, that is, becoming more of a diaspora or less of a diaspora, become more of a one-centered global Jewish polity, or a multi-centered, or something that does not have a center. These are alternative and competing models, and about this we can have different experiences and different ideas, but certainly it is not a static equation. It's something that changes, and so we, the investigators, are called to express our opinion. Of course, the two questions which are the most fundamental are, what about the similarities and dissimilarities between Latin American Jews and their non-Jewish peers belonging to other ethnic groups and other religious groups in the same areas where they are involved? And on the other hand, the differences and similarities of Latin American Jews vis-a-vis other Jews in the northern part of the continent, in Europe, and maybe in other continents. Are there certain commonalities or not? Which is the strongest, in other words, the common bond and the common assumptions, or the local variation? And of course, both are important, and both exist. In any case, one thing that has attracted my attention is this element of the utopia. Latin America, in my view, was one of the great utopias. The golden Medina, of course, the United States was a great utopia. The greatest of all was Eretz HaKodesh, Zion, Jerusalem, and the state of Israel. And nevertheless, there is a utopian component in the Jewish settlement of Latin America, which was also meant, at least in that part, which was the colonization experience, meant to revolutionize the destiny and behaviors and beliefs of the Jewish communities in the previous stage. Whether each of these three utopias, US, Israel, Latin America, and maybe others, have succeeded or not, this is a very big topic for discussion. Perhaps the conclusions might be somewhat disappointing at this specific conjuncture, but it is interesting to compare them. I think that therefore, by the way, sharing the observation by Judith that I expected to find more uprootedness in the papers we examined, whereas we found a lot about mobility and about embeddedness, and above all about the resources, the resourcefulness of those who had to challenge their transitions and their new environments, and very much succeeded at doing that. All of this was to some extent a surprise. I wonder whether this is just randomal, or because the writers prefer to focus on the positive rather than on the negative, although there are a few papers which definitely tackle the problematic, the sad, the suffering, no question about that. But this is not really the general impression of this volume. So this is one question for further investigation. And then, of course, perhaps my final comment is whether the Jews are a project of themselves or they are a project of someone else. And that is, what are the limits of self-expression, and to what extent self-expression has to be limited within the acceptable parameters of the host society. And we quickly gave a quick perusal to some of the constitutions of the main Latin American countries, that is, the countries with the main Jewish communities. And I would say my impression is that the conclusion is not univocal. You look at some of the constitutions and you find there is nothing that prevents full equality. Other constitutions define the legitimate and the normative in a way which, let's be honest, totally excludes the Jews. That is, the Jew as a Jew, if the person wants to affirm one's own identity with that specificity, is not included in the national project. Or else, to be included in the national project, you must give up whatever is particular in your particular identity and cultural inheritance. This is a dilemma which I don't see often discussed. The tendency is probably to say, okay, it's fine, we made it and we do our best. Sometimes the impression is somewhat different. I'm sorry I don't see here Adrian on screen. Adrian's paper gave an example of what happens when the framework is somewhat disrupted by turbulences in the respective situations. And at the point where belonging or not belonging, being part of the project or not, comes to the extreme. And so people decide to change their environment and they try to start a new adventure. With these words, I wish really to warmly thank my colleagues, and I hope this is just one example of many more things that we can accomplish together with the combined efforts and under the roof of LAJSA, to which we wish many years of fruitful activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sergio. So we will start giving the voice to each of the contributors who are present here. We can start with Roland Ryan and Igal Eisenberg, and then Judit and Sergio, please take the lead and present each other if you want. Please take in account, I think we have at least 8 people here who would like to talk, so try really to be brief, no more than 5 minutes each of you, and then we will have some time for discussion.
So thank you so much, Cynthia. Shalom and buenos dias. First, I would like to congratulate my friends and colleagues, J.Liwerant, Ran, and Sergio DellaPergola, for co-editing a fine issue of the journal Latin American Jewish Studies. I promise to be very, very brief. When one reviews the state of our scholarly fields of studies, she or he will immediately notice several lacunae in the existing bibliography. Very little attention has been given, for example, to the social history and economic history of Jewish Latin Americans. In 1982, Eugene Soffer published his book, From Pale to Pampa, A Social History of the Jews of Buenos Aires. Since then, only very few works of this kind have been published. Very little has been written, for example, on the Jewish working class in South America, or specifically in Argentina. A recent exception is Walter Kaufmann's book, La Madera de la Clase Obrera Argentina, Izquierdas, Etnicidad y Género en una industria de Buenos Aires, 1889-1930. Even less attention has been given to the business history of Jewish Latin Americans. My former student, Enrique Martinez Ruiz, wrote an interesting book on Jewish Colombian entrepreneurs and the urban development of Bogota. And now Igal Eisenberg is about to complete a fascinating doctoral dissertation on Jewish Argentine entrepreneurs and on ethnic financial institutions in Argentina. I believe I do know something on the history of Jewish Argentines, but Igal's dissertation is of a pioneering nature and sheds a new light on these aspects. With Igal, we have recently published the article titled No Solo Fabricantes Textiles, Inmigración y Financiación de los Metalúrgicos Judíos en Argentina, in Investigaciones y Ensayos, the academic journal of Argentina's Academia Nacional de la Historia. And in this special issue of Latin American Jewish Studies, we jointly published the article Emprendedores sin Capital, Inmigrantes Judíos y la Industria Textil Argentina, 1945, and I will let Igal to say a few words about this article.
Thank you, Ranan. Shalom, everybody. I hope you can hear me here. I'll be very brief, less than 4 minutes, so bear with me. Argentine business historians often mention Teubal Hermanos, Textil Oeste, and LAJSA as examples of failed companies that went down in the 70s and 80s. They are not among the numerous case studies published in Argentina in the last 30 years about Spanish, Italian, French, Belgian, and German industrial undertakings, their founders, beginnings, and achievements. By the way, like their Jewish contemporaries, many ended up in bankruptcy or nationalization. This article is part of my research on first-generation Jewish immigrants who became large industrial entrepreneurs after 1920, until their decline in the mid-60s. The article focuses on 3 entrepreneurs who have reached the forefront of Argentina's textile industry. 2 of them are mentioned by Norberto Galasso, a Peronism historian who mentions Peron's meetings in 1944 in his capacity as Labor and Social Welfare Secretary, with whom he calls the Russos Levin from Textil Oeste, Salomon from LAJSA, the Thanos Di Della from Siam and Roca from Techint, and other Spanish, French, and German immigrant industrialists. Now, never mind that Salomon was a Sephardi from Salonika and not precisely Russian, that Levin Hermanos acquired Textil Oeste 7 years after the alleged meetings, and Agostino Roca immigrated to Argentina in 1947, Galasso unintendedly highlights an important fact. By the mid-40s, there were prominent Jewish industrialists in Argentina, and not only in textiles. The article underlines the 2 primary axes of the research: the marginal or inexistent contribution of Jewish banks to the financing needs of industrialists like Teubal, Levin, and Salomon, and its impact on the ethnic extra weight carried by Jewish entrepreneurs. I address in my research the notion of Jewish global financial power, shared by most Jewish-friendly Argentines, and not only by traditional anti-Semites. I point out the stark contrast between merchant and investment banks with Sephardic and German roots in Western Europe and North America, and the commercial banks of Eastern Europe, which disappeared in Russia and were decimated in interwar Poland, casting a pale reflection in Argentina. In that respect, extending a concept developed by some of the scholars present here, I would say that in the case of Argentine Jews, Jewish transnational financing was a myth. Specifically, reviewing Jewish banks' reports in the 30s and early 40s, I characterized their fragmentation, undercapitalization, and unprofessional management in so many words as too many banks, too few bankers, and no Rothschilds. The article ends with a story that encapsulates, in my view, the business uneven field faced by Argentine Jews. Torquato Di Tella, Alejandro Levin, and Nisim Teubal were men of military age when the First War started. Di Tella responded to the Italian draft, was sent to the front, and returned as a decorated officer. Despite Argentina's melting pot nationalism that condemned immigrants' attachment to their motherland, he was received as a war hero, his social prestige peaked, and local banks financed his new business. One can only imagine Levin and Teubal joining the Tsar or the Sultan armies and speculate about a warm reception back in Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that both extremely interesting contribution of both of you, which I think enriches really the issue, because indeed we lack this dimension that that Ranan mentioned, but we didn't receive, and probably it reflects also the status of this field among our research. So now, thank you to both of you. I would like to ask if our colleague from Costa Rica is ready to present also in 7 minutes. You may make your choice, Spanish or English, your chapter, right? That was part of the foundational moment of a Jewish presence in a Latin American country.
Well, thank you all for the invitation, and it's a really honor for me to be here and be with you, with great academics from Latin American studies. Well, I would like to, well, I don't have, I'm apologizing, I'm a secondary teacher, so this week was full of work, so I couldn't prepare something special for this, but I would like to mention some special parts of my chapter, especially the historical understanding of the Jewish community in Costa Rica, because there's an empty field to study Costa Rican Jewish communities and also the Central America. And my goal to this is to create, let me say, like, I'm going to change to Spanish, sorry. Lo que trato de crear es una conexión entre los estudios judaicos latinoamericanos, tanto del sur como del norte, lo que es los grandes focos de conocimiento de México, Argentina, el cono sur sobre todo, porque de Centroamérica realmente hay muy poco en términos de estudios históricos. Entonces este entendimiento contextual ha sido parte importante de mi trabajo, y también poder conectarlo con los estudios sobre Estados Unidos y sobre todo la relación con Israel. A partir de ahí, bueno, los detalles particulares del proceso inmigratorio ha sido esencial para mí, para también, digamos, lograr conectar diferentes dinámicas que se dan a lo largo del continente, que tienen ciertos patrones en común. Por ejemplo, la caracterización de la etnicidad como eje central de la construcción de las comunidades, sobre todo el tema religioso, que también es religioso e ideológico, porque también, bueno, hay diferentes posturas desde la visión sionista, desde la visión de la izquierda, desde una visión más ortodoxa. Entonces, todos estos elementos hacen que digamos, este primer contexto sea sumamente importante para poder conectar las diferentes aristas que hacen que, primero, haya judíos en Costa Rica, que también es muy interesante, judíos ashkenazi, y también que haya judíos sefaradim, que también ese es otro tema que hay que trabajarlo y vincularlo. A partir de ahí, bueno, creo que sobre todo el análisis sociocultural de los elementos específicos de esta comunidad que es tan relevante y que tiene un peso muy importante, porque a partir de este proceso se desarrolló, digámoslo así, una comunidad muy pequeña en términos demográficos, pero muy relevante en términos políticos, en términos culturales y económicos, que tiene, digamos, una relevancia hasta el día de hoy. También, digamos, que este paso de esta pequeña comunidad a una comunidad organizada, centrada en el modelo de la Keilah, ¿verdad? Con una comunidad realmente tan pequeña y que tenga tantas instituciones judías, es muy interesante, sobre todo como les digo, por el tema demográfico y su conexión con otras comunidades, sobre todo con la argentina, con la mexicana. También, bueno, como lo comentaban a lo largo de la presentación, el tema de la perspectiva transnacional que tiene todo el proceso migratorio, el proceso de conexiones transnacionales en términos culturales, en términos políticos, en términos religiosos, también la manera en que la vida judía se institucionaliza a partir de la relación que hay con estos focos o los grandes focos de poblaciones judías, que hace que Costa Rica no sea una comunidad aislada, sino que esté muy conectada y que también hace que hasta el día de hoy se evidencien esos grandes nexos. Sobre todo también me gustaría destacar el modelo comunitario, como ya mencioné algunos elementos anteriormente, el tema de ciertas obligaciones comunitarias, el establecimiento o el cambio principalmente de una comunidad meramente de habla yiddish a una completamente, o de hebraización, más bien que sea un paso hacia la hebraización, también una comunidad que se vincula directamente con el movimiento sionista, tanto es así que es de las pocas comunidades que tiene dentro de su título el Centro Israelita Sionista de Costa Rica, por ejemplo, ¿verdad? Que directamente ya tiene una posición muy marcada y que también el proceso de construcción política a lo interno tuvo diferentes elementos de disputa entre los socialistas, los ortodoxos, los sionistas, que al final de cuentas el sionismo, bueno, toma una mayor relevancia. Creo que también la contribución que se hace a los estudios judaicos latinoamericanos es muy importante desde mi posición, porque visibiliza y pone a discutir los estudios costarricenses, a Costa Rica como un país tan pequeño, pero también muy relevante en términos de conexiones geográficamente y también sobre todo por el desarrollo político que tuvo diferente al resto de Centroamérica durante la posguerra y sobre todo durante la Guerra Fría, que también hizo que las comunidades tuviesen una mayor relevancia y que veámoslo así también, la estructura comunitaria fuese muy sólida y sobreviviese tanto tiempo. Y bueno, creo que esos serían mis aportes. Y más bien, nuevamente les reitero el agradecimiento por estar acá y por que me permitieran ser parte del volumen.
Oh, muchas gracias, realmente muy bien que ya nos conocimos también, decíamos, ¿no? El rostro y la voz detrás de la mano y la palabra escrita. Bueno, me está comunicando Sergio que se fue la luz en su casa y que no tiene acceso a internet, que espera que en unos minutos regrese. Continuamos entonces y pasamos a este grupo tan interesante de estudiosos de la condición de los inmigrantes judíos de Brasil en Israel. Y está hoy con nosotros Noam Levin, y vamos a pedirle a él igual que nos plantee cuál crees tú que fue el aporte fundamental o el desafío fundamental que los llevó a esta conjunción de esfuerzos para el artículo y para el proyecto amplio del cual forma parte. Por favor.
Gracias, Judith. Can I share my screen? I want to...
Preferimos no, a menos de que sea, preferimos irnos en los límites, a menos de que sea estrictamente necesario.
Because I prepared a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. It's not possible to show it?
¿Tienes tú la restricción del tiempo?
Sí, sí, sí. Que 5
Adelante.
minutos.
Cynthia, ¿podemos? We are sharing the screen. Pues en fin.
So can I share my screen or not?
Can I try? Can you try?
Yeah, okay, yeah. Now I can try. Now I can do it. So just a second. Share my screen. Let me see. Okay. Great. So I will start. So thanks very much. I would like to acknowledge my co-authors, Adriana Russi, Debbie Oshafat, Ruth Kark, and Carlos Alberto Povoa. So I will try to be brief. So historically, the presence of Jews in Brazil started in the 16th century, but the most significant immigrations were later on in the 19th and 20th century. And according to the IBGE, Brazil's statistics geographic agency, more than 100,000 Jews were living in Brazil about 14 years ago. In this map, you can see roughly, the waves of migration geographically and where they came from and to which parts of Brazil. Brazilian immigration to Israel was mostly, of course, from Southeast Brazil, because that's where most Jews live, in the states of Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Minas Gerais. So these are the main sources of immigration to Israel. And compared to other countries in the Americas, the Jews from Brazil are the third largest immigrating community after the US and Argentina. According to Sergio DellaPergola, approximately 17,000 former Brazilians live in Israel. Here we can see more or less over time the periods when Jews from Brazil immigrated to Israel. So we have in the beginning of the 1950s, the establishment of the Bur Hail, which was known as the Brazilian kibbutz of Israel, and which luckily survived the attack of Hamas in October 7. But the main waves of immigration to Israel by Jews were in the 1960s and during COVID. Many Jews came to Israel. In this article, we interviewed 300 using questionnaires. Sorry. I'm not feeling well. 300 former Brazilians who live in Israel, about their diversity and their, saudade do Brasil. Okay, the feeling of missing, of loss. And mainly we focused on food, because food is such an important thing in all our lives, and also in the communities of people who migrate from one country to another. Food is one of the basic elements we're drawn to. So the people that were interviewed both talked about how it was, the challenges of being Jewish, living in Brazil, maintaining kosher food. So that's one aspect. Another aspect, once people move to Israel. So you can see some examples. Okay, what to bring to Israel, what to bring to the kibbutz. Okay, things which, at least in the past, were not available at all in Israel. Now it's much easier to find Brazilian food, but back then, many ingredients were totally missing. Here you can see something about this saudade de feijão. Okay, the famous rice and black beans and farinha and meat. So this is just one example of these foods that people discussed in the questionnaires. And the central place still in families of Jewish Brazilians in Israel of Brazilian food, for example, here in a birthday party, what you must have to maintain the tradition. And as part of this, in addition to the paper itself, we also had also made a physical exhibition, which was called Açaí. That's well, we all know this Amazonian superfood, palm tree, and dates. So Saudades da Comida Brasileira no Israel, and this was first presented physical exhibition in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and then in other places in Israel, and also in Brazil. Here's an example of this exhibition in Niterói, near here, and also a digital exhibition in the Museu da Pessoa, which is the Museum of Persons, which is a Brazilian digital museum where there are many videos of people telling about themselves. So we have videos of people telling their stories, and I don't know if I have time to show one of these videos. You need to tell me. So muito obrigado a vocês.
Thank you. I think that, okay. So it was a very short and descriptive presentation of the, what I understand is a research as bringing you together, right? Thank you very much.
I try to be very brief, so to allow everyone time.
Thank you very much. Now, Perla, is your turn, please.
Okay, good morning, everybody again. Thanks a lot for Judit and Sergio y a los editores de este excelente número. I would be brief following what Judit and Sergio asked at the beginning, the topic, objectives, and some description about the article. I named my article Relocation of Life and Redefinitions of Identities, Israelis in Mexico as a case study. The topic, migration and identity in transnational times. And the main objective to focus on the effects of transnational migration on identity formation and transformation. More specifically, to analyze the effects of transnational life on the identity formation of Israelis living abroad. So the article addresses a reflection on the concept of identity in migratory context, present a brief description of the case study Israelis in Mexico, and analyzes the effects of transnational migration on migrants' identity, deepening into two of the central components of their identity mosaic, which is being Jewish, the ethno-religious community cultural identity, and being Israeli, the national identity, two dimensions which are strongly intertwined. So I didn't have an hypothesis since it wasn't a quantitative research study, but I had several assumptions. Among them, that migration in transnational times does not necessarily imply the weakening of the multiple identities, but in many cases, their strengthening or reformulation, that migrants build their identities through mobility, and that multiple forms of belonging develop through the migratory experience. And my idea, which is an old adagio, that home is where the heart is. So as a cliffhanger, I will leave you with the desire to read the article, to learn about the sample, the methodology, especially the use of semantic networks as the innovative contribution of this research and the findings. I just would like to point out that there is no single Israeli experience of migration. A high percentage of Israelis living abroad are transnational migrants. That means that they continue to be active in their homeland while at the same time becoming part of their host societies. The Jewish dimension is an anchor in the migration process. The emotional connectedness to Israel is strongly preserved. Being Israeli can be considered a way of life, and culture is central to continuity. Israelis do not need to be physically present in the country to be culturally and linguistically at home. So one of the critical questions the findings prompt was, how can we explain that high levels of emotional connectedness, nostalgia, interest in still being part of what happens in Israel, or even the importance of providing a Zionist education to their children, were reported by individuals who live outside the country? So how can we understand Zionism or Zionist values among those Israelis who voluntarily choose to live abroad? And the argument proposed indicates that Israeli migrants expand the possibilities of defining the content of Zionism, or in other words, they extend their definition of Zionism and reinvent their ties with the country. So another critical reflection I would like to share is that the passage of migrants into transnational life is made more feasible by the existence of a vast transnational social space, a network of ties, relations, and practices of the migrant Israeli population closely connected to the larger transnational social space of the world Jewish migration system, or in other words, the elevated levels of transnationalism in Israeli migration can be explained by the transnational being of the global Jewish world. As future directions, as was asked by Judit and Sergio, my current research delves into the constitution of what I call the Israeli transnational social space, closely related to what Sergio and Judit call the Jewish migration system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You really were short and addressing some of the questions that we posed to you. Thank you. Thank you, Perla. And now, Mirta. Now, it's your turn, please. You brought us all this aire, right? Of this aire estético del arte para explorar la identidad. Please, Mirta.
Muchas gracias. Yo voy a hablar en español, así hablo más rápido porque pronto tengo que empezar una clase. Bueno, quiero agradecer a todos y voy a tratar de ir directo al tema, siendo migrante una vez más, ya que voy a hablar y mi campo y mi lenguaje es la imagen, pero voy a abordarlo desde la palabra en este caso. Se suele ver a los artistas como hacedores de una imagen estética para embellecer la vida. Sin embargo, los artistas somos testigos de la vida y de la muerte, y contrariamente a lo que popularmente a veces se cree, es verdad que a veces expresamos lo propio, pero siempre estamos representando a un grupo. Mi contribución, en este caso, que siempre, es decir, siguiendo a Sergio habló de ser un outsider. Yo soy más outsider aún, Sergio, porque otra vez, porque mi mundo de la imagen en este espacio académico es outsider, pero debo decir que a pesar de haber nacido en la Argentina, y de esto trata mi contribución en este número, justamente habla de uprootedness, de haber nacido siendo outsider, ya que yo soy hija de inmigrantes sobrevivientes de la Shoah, que hicieron todo un esfuerzo para instalarse, para ser argentinos. Acá tengo un ejemplo del éxito de mis padres. Sin embargo, la imagen que trabajé, que analicé en este libro, se llama All of Them With Me, todos ellos conmigo, porque lo que yo explico es que yo siempre sentí que estaba en el colegio y en todos lados, y aparece en la imagen, voy a describir un árbol con todos los ancestros, como una nena de colegio llevando el árbol a todos lados. Esta imagen se transformó como en un ícono en mi obra, y en la imagen en el libro está la foto original de donde nació esa idea, y lo interpreto a posteriori, porque debo decir que en mi casa no había una sola foto. Yo crecí sin ninguna imagen. Mis padres llegaron sin ninguna foto, no conocí caras de familiares hasta muchísimos años después. Es decir, la ausencia de imagen formó tal vez mi necesidad de expresar a través de ellas. Pero hurgando e investigando en la imagen, porque sí me considero una investigadora a través del arte, humildemente y en mi campo, después los invito a que miren con atención la imagen en el libro. Hay dos fotos en donde aparecen mis padres y otros inmigrantes de Polonia. Mi mamá es húngara, aún vive, pero de Polonia, aquí en la Argentina, en una quinta en Coronel Brancer que se llamaba Villa Lodge, Villa Łódź, y aparecen con pantalones de gaucho mi papá y un tío lejano. Es decir, esta uprootedness, esto vivir siempre añorando y longing y deseando, incluso yo que nací aquí en Argentina, no sé si lo dije, creo que sí, yo me considero, me han puesto, Marianne Hirsch me ha puesto en un lugar de post-memory, y realmente me siento identificada porque las marcas que tengo son más por situaciones que yo nunca viví, pero que sí vivieron otros. Entonces ahora, para terminar, quiero hablar sobre lo que creo que es mi función, mi privilegio y mi obligación como artista. Los artistas tenemos la responsabilidad, así lo entiendo yo desde mi lugar de intención de trabajar con la memoria, de transmitir más allá de las palabras, porque ya vemos que este Zoom es una torre de Babel. Sin embargo, al mirar una imagen podemos acceder a mundos propios, asociaciones propias, y sin todas estas explicaciones que yo estoy dando. Quiero agradecer a Sergio, a Judit, a LAJSA, a todos ustedes, y bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Bueno, gracias, Mirta. Yo respondí a ti diciendo sin imagen, porque pensábamos que la palabra nos podía realmente reunir, y espero que no violentamos mucho esta
No,
situación.
está perfecto. Perdón, la imagen está en el libro de todas maneras, así que van a tener que llegar al final, ¿eh?
Claro, bueno, habrá quien también piense que como es un Jewish question, lea de derecha a izquierda y el tuyo sea el primero, eso también podemos confiar. Pero
Yo
mira,
empecé por el final, para que sepas, Mirta,
¿cómo, querida?
que yo empecé por el final,
Bueno, me
así
gusta
que vi la
mucho.
foto.
Gusta mucho, esa es una linda posibilidad. Realmente creo que la dimensión artística, estética, este ámbito amplio cultural, me recuerda en este momento la definición de un gran antropólogo, Clifford Geertz, cuando decía, el cambio social es cambio cultural y viceversa. Y esto es lo que estamos viendo en nuestras comunidades. Bueno, mira, me seguí en español, qué natural, y también con toque argentino en castellano. Bueno, interacción. Ok, continuamos. Tenemos ahorita a... ¿Quién tenemos aquí? A Lisette. Lisette, ¿estás por aquí? Por favor, Lisette, adelante.
Hola a todos. Bueno, primeramente quiero agradecer a LAJSA. Es un honor ser parte de LAJSA y es un honor para mí compartir un poquito de mi investigación sobre migraciones de Gloria Gerbich. Zichrono Libraja, que su memoria sea para bendición. Así que, bueno, shalom, shalom a todos y si me permiten hablarlo en español, porque también, igual que mis colegas, hablo más rápido. Bueno, básicamente investigo en el poemario de Gloria Gerbich la uprootedness que decimos, que algunos han compartido, ¿no? Ese uprootedness, por ejemplo, de la profesora Mirta, es lo que yo miro en su poemario, porque ella, aunque la voz poética sea esa nieta de la inmigrante que cruzó desde Ucrania, cruzó el mar para venir a México, inclusive al principio no llega a México, llega a Cuba y luego finalmente arriba a México, siempre mirando hacia el mar, el océano, siempre mirando hacia lo que ha perdido, hacia su familia que ha muerto, hacia su familia que no va a volver a poder ver. Y yo en mi texto, usando algunas entrevistas de Gloria Gerbich, puedo asumir una posibilidad de que hayan muerto o en la Shoah, o que hayan muerto por una bomba relacionada con la guerra, o sea, que hayan muerto o en un campo de concentración de la Shoah, o en una bomba, por una bomba que haya detonado en el pueblo de Kiev, donde ellos vivían, donde la familia de la abuela era, y cómo la voz poética se desdobla en ella, en su abuela, inclusive en esos parientes, esos familiares de su abuela. Y me parece interesante porque todos los personajes son femeninos y ella habla de su experiencia judía femenina, no digo femenina porque ya cuando hablamos de feminismo hablamos de otra cosa, pero es de la experiencia como mujer, experiencia de mujeres que viven el judaísmo y cómo lo viven. Y bueno, hablo acerca de, en su poemario, la voz poética, cómo comparte sus tradiciones, las oraciones, el Kaddish, el Yizkor, dicho desde la perspectiva para una mamá, para una persona que ha fallecido que es mujer, ¿no? Como ella dice el Kaddish para su madre y para sí misma, como ella dice el Yizkor para su abuela. Y cómo hace estas experiencias y inclusive la cábala se vuelve algo femenino. Bueno, solo quería compartir eso y muchas gracias por dejarme ser parte de este coloquio hoy. Gracias. Shalom, shalom.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Debo decirte que una espléndida contribución. Me parece que has tenido una lectura, ay, perdón, jóvenes, una lectura excelente. No sé qué pasa, pero bueno, una lectura excelente. Mientras Gloria murió y hay muchos acercamientos y es muy interesante porque estaba yo viendo y pensé en ti que en estos días va a haber un acto de recordatorio y me temo, voy a permitirme mantenerlo en anonimato de quienes participan, que habrá un proceso de desjudaización de Gloria y la incorporación a la parte más espiritual y amorfa que se da. Tu trabajo donde además ejemplifica el lugar de la mujer, el lugar de la mujer y la literatura femenina, me parece tremendamente importante. ¿Quién más está con nosotros el día de hoy que podemos continuar?
Yo,
¿Dónde estás?
Gabriela.
Gabriela.
Ah, perdón, Gabriela, te estaba buscando, perdón, no te vi.
Ok,
Gabriela Jonas, correcto.
okay. Sí. Bueno, thank you for inviting me to participate in the presentation of LAJSA Special Issue. Hablo más rápido en español, pero lo escribí en inglés, lo hablo en inglés, lo voy a leer en inglés. In my essay, I analyze the Argentina telenovela Argentina, Tierra de Amor y Venganza, which reenact the story of the organization of Simania and focuses on the mythical J.Liwerant. The television text recreate the immigration's current, the boats, the neighborhood networks that were woven into a country with open doors. I argue that the telenovela offers a retrospective framing that reads the past through contemporary sensibilities and deflecting elements most intelligible in contemporary terms. The telenovela refers the migration flow to Argentine from Italy, Spain, Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, and portrays the society of Argentina and Buenos Aires in particular as characterized by multiculturality and specific idiosyncrasy and diverse identities that were consolidated as a product of the number of immigrants who arrived at the country in search of new opportunities. Several characters of ATAB was Jews. J.Liwerant, Samuel Trauman, an alter ego of Noe Trauman, the first president of the Varsovia entity, which later became Simania, David Lowenstein and his wife Sarah, among others. That's true, the identities of each Jewish characters, and from an historical perspective, ATAB addresses complex topics such the feminism movement, human trafficking, and immigration policies in the 21st century. Historical period telenovelas are a genre developed by the Latin American television industry. They are storytelling which contain all the basic elements of a fictional narrative, target mass audience. The text combine the characters with factual or fictional events in scenarios that depict the customs and mores of the period in conjunction with wars and several historical events. The period telenovela Argentina, Tierra de Amor y Venganza depicts events in the story of Argentina during the beginning of the 20th century and reconnects them with recent events. Moreover, it presents guidelines that value and frame the past and reconstruct fragments of historical memory through a modern perspective. Retrospective framing is a context between various identities and ideologies. In the case of ATAB, the identity of Jews as others who are part of the establishment allows for debating events in contemporary Argentine history. This interpretation is achieved through a dynamic television language, but mainly by present several historical events like human trafficking and migration that resonate with events like the Ni Una Menos movement and the change in immigration policies in force during the administration of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner and Mauricio Macri. In conclusion, ATAB, a superior telenovela, presents a specific version of history, but neither blurs nor invents a non-existent past. Occasionally, it uses historical elements set design, custom design, historical characters as a decorative and aesthetic framework to aid storytelling. Through retrospective framing, the show reaffirms contemporary ideologies and identities and simultaneously recreates fragments of Jews and Argentina's historical memory. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for you too. I think we have been extremely disciplined, and probably what we can do now is to open the conversation. We still have time, Cynthia.
Yes, we have a few minutes to open a debate or just asking questions. So please feel free to open your microphone.
Well, maybe I will say a couple of words. I'm sorry, I had an interruption of power. There was an electricity failure in the house, and we had to locate the cause. So I lost a couple of interventions, but overall the speakers were very interesting and to some extent expanded upon their texts. Of course, there are endless specific questions. I would like to mention three for future work, and I think there is a lot of things that are missing in our volume. Of course, we cannot pretend to have been omni-comprehensive. One question that I don't think was covered very much is the question of the transmission of identity, intergenerational. That is, there are the first generation of the new immigrants, and then the second and third, and now we are well into the fourth and fifth generation. And of course, identities change, they are reshaped as a function of local experiences and of the changing times. And so it would be interesting in the future to see some evaluation of these transformations. The second point is that of the international networks, because so many have emigrated from Latin America. And so today, Latin Americans are a very visible reality in Latin America. Many have changed from one country to another. Allow me a smile. I hear, well, perhaps it's vulgar, the Argentinian accent of those who speak from Colombia and the Mexican accent of those who speak from Uruguay. My ear is enough sensitive to nuances to see from which particular part of the continent the people come. And so more seriously, there has been a lot of mobility out of Argentina and Uruguay to Mexico, to Panama, for example. Panama, unfortunately, was not represented in our survey. But many live in the United States, and so many live in Israel. And these networks are very powerful and active, and it would be interesting to see what happens in the transnational communication of these Latin Americans. And the last is the future of migration. What can we say, both in terms of coming to Latin America and moving from Latin America, under what circumstances and with what consequences, not only for the individuals, but also for the institutions. One of the most extraordinary contributions, in my view, of Latin American communities has been the very powerful community infrastructure, an example for the rest of the world. And the question is what happens, what changes occur, and what will happen in the future, where the situation in front of our eyes is changing very rapidly. In any case, lots of future work for historians, literary critics, and sociologists and artists. And so I hope we will see this represented in the future of LAJSA.
If we don't have any question, which I'll wait, I also would like to share you a last thought that was praised in this case through the concept of insider and outsiders, which is not only, as we know, a question of an epistemic question for our community of researchers, but also for our subjects of study, right? It now comes to my mind that when I first had to deal with this, facing the Association for Social Scientific Study of Jury that aims to be real international, but has a very important anchor in the States, I decided to go to reflect, to bring about both ideas, one by the sociologist Robert Merton and the other by Marshall Sklar, one of the founders of contemporary jury studies in the States. And both approach this idea as was presented, that shall we question the idea that only insiders can understand the social and cultural truth of the group? Under this assumption, outsiders cannot have full access to the insider knowledge. A power dynamic emerges in this knowledge structure since the traditional insiders are members of an hegemonic group. In my hegemonic group and an hegemonic vision also. So in my case, however, it is an epistemic community, the one we shared, that has inner variation, and I think we should benefit from the idea of insider and outsiders, right? Even taking into account that among researchers and students in the States, the first book that was published on multiculturalism in the US has an undertitle, Insiders as Outsiders. So this possibility of an eternal moving in between inside and outside, I think should be a privilege really of our field of study. This is what I wanted to say. And of course, looking forward to continue this reflection in the first opportunity that we would be able to reconnect. Cynthia, that's all what I wanted to say. I think we are on the limits of time, right?
Yes, thank you very much, Judith and Sergio, and all the contributors and the participants here. The public, of course, it has been a pleasure and an honor. And please let's meet next May 14 in Simania. I wish you all Pesach Sameach. Take care and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Cynthia.
Thank you very much. Very much.
פסח שמח לכולם, חג שמח.